I'm going to be responding to the oral test questions for ENG4U Unit 4. So, question 1 is the narrative. Do you perceive Dunstan as being reliable or unreliable? If it feels unreliable to you, why do you think Davies chose to create the feeling of the story and or Dunstan that way? So here's my answer. Personally, I perceive Dunstan as being unreliable. The novel is written in the first person point of view, and Dunstan is the narrator. So the readers only get to read and understand how Dunstan feels and how he reacts to certain situations. This makes Dunstan unreliable as his conscience is constantly overwhelmed by guilt, and he often exaggerates. An example of where he exaggerates would be when Dunstan writes about Paul turning into a famous magician. Dunstan makes it seem like he made Paul into the magician by teaching him the magic egg trick when in reality, Paul mastered magic by himself in the circus. I think that Davies chose to make Dunstan an unreliable narrator because it links to the theme of myth and faith that is used throughout the novel. By making the reader question Dunstan's account of the story and how he feels, Davies is ultimately making the reader question themselves. He is basically saying, how do you know if your memories are true? How do you know if what you see is the truth and not just an illusion? The whole novel is based on the objectivity of truth and memory, so that's the reason why I believe Davies made Dunstan an unreliable narrator. Okay. Question 2 has to do with archetypes, and the question is, what are the character archetypes, particularly in connection to Dunstan's personal journey of individuation in fifth business? Map individual characters to their corresponding archetype and reflect on how that contributes or not to the meaning in the novel. So I will be discussing 2 characters and how their archetypes are connected to Dunstan's journey of individuation. The first character is Percy Boyd Staunton. Percy is Dunstan's shadow. He is the shadow archetype of the novel. He is Dunstan's complete opposite, and he brings out the worst of Dunstan. Percy is connected to Dunstan's journey to individuation because he helps Dunstan to acknowledge the dark side of his mind. This allows Dunstan to face his darkness and embrace the light. The second character is Liesl Vitzlipitzi. Liesl is the anima archetype of the novel. She voices out Dunstan's buried thoughts and provokes Dunstan to take action. This helps Dunstan to release his pent-up pain and agony. An example of this would be when she bluntly tells Dunstan that he has always been the fifth business and that he should just accept it rather than fight it. Liesl is linked to Dunstan's journey to individuation because she helps Dunstan to embrace his feminine side. There's a final reflective question, and that is, does Dunstan find himself through the writing of the novel? What might depict that discovery? Okay, so my answer is, I believe that Dunstan does find himself by writing the novel. Carl Jung claims that in order to find oneself, they have to go through 3 main processes: the spiritual process, the biological romantic process, and an intellectual process. So throughout Dunstan's life, he completes each of these processes, and by writing the novel in Switzerland, he is reflecting on each of these processes. His spiritual process involved Mary Dempster and her saint-like abilities. His biological romantic process was fulfilled by Faustina. He meets her during Paul's tour in Mexico. And lastly, the intellectual process was achieved by Liesl. She helps Dunstan to understand his place in the world. Overall, I do believe that Dunstan finds himself through writing the novel because it allows him to reflect on how he finished the 3 main processes of finding oneself. So the next question is names and naming. Names bear significant meaning in the novel. Mary, for example, can be connected both to the Virgin Mary and Mary Magdalene. Consider these 2 names associations in connection with the character of Mary Dempster. Which do you think she is? So my answer is, personally, I believe that Mary Dempster is more connected to the Virgin Mary than Mary Magdalene. I think this because throughout the novel, Mary Dempster Mary Dempster, performs 3 miracles. She brings Dunstan's brother Willie back to life. She helps reform a tramp and appears to Dunstan on Madonna's statue when he thought he was going to die during the war. That being said, Mrs. Dempster did sleep with the tramp, making her unfaithful to her husband and connecting her to Mary Magdalene. However, I think her miracles far outweigh her flaws, making her appear as the Virgin Mary to me. The next question is, in the novel, a new name is connected with the notion of being twice born. Another term for twice born is reborn, a word often used in connection to being baptized. There's A, B, C, D, and E, so identify who receives a new name. What does their first name signify, and then what does their second name signify? How do the changes connect to the characters and their stories in the novel? What do you think is significant about who renames each character? And could it be argued that their first name and their reborn name each represent different character archetypes? So the person that I will be working with is Paul Dempster. He receives a new name. He renames himself to Magnus Ensigram. Magnus means the great and Ensigram means wolf. I think the change of Paul's name connects to his character because it symbolizes his constant need for power. Furthermore, his name also connects to Dunstan's story, as when Dunstan sees how far Paul has come, he wants to be a better man himself. I think that the fact that Paul renames himself is significant because it shows how he is independent. It can be argued that Paul's old name and his new name represent different character archetypes. I think this because Paul's old name, Dempster, means redemption. As a child, Paul was born prematurely and was often bullied by the townspeople, so his name is fitting for redemption, as he was searching for redemption throughout his whole life. So when he renames himself to Magnus, it means he's the great, as in he no longer needs to redeem himself and that he is content in his own skin. And by renaming himself to Magnus, he is able to find his archetypal position in the novel. He becomes the magician, bringing power and wonder to all of those around him. The next question is religious characters. So there's A and B. For A, it's with 500 to 800 souls, there are 5 churches. What does that tell us about the town of Deptford? So the fact that there are 5 churches shows that Deptford is a very religious town. They probably have high standards when it comes to religion. This would explain why they look down upon Mrs. Dempster, the crazy wife of a parson. Part B is choose 2 characters who are associated with one of the churches. What does the religion tell about their character, according to the novel's narrator? Offer examples of their character for what they say or do in the novel. So for B, the 2 characters that I will be discussing are Amasa Dempster and Padre Blazon. Amasa Dempster is a devoted parson that is respected by the townspeople. However, I feel that his strict devotion to his religion has caused him to become a strict person in general. This can be shown by him rudely banishing Dunstan just for teaching baby Paul magic. Padre Blazon, on the other hand, is also devoted to his religion. However, his devotion allows him to concentrate on his place and realize the physiological truth over the objective truth. This can be shown through him guiding Dunstan on what to think of Mrs. Dempster. The next question has to do with writing reality in the novel. The question is, as Padre Blazon says to Dunstan, if you think her a saint, she is a saint to you. Who is she? That is what you must discover, Ramsay, and you must find your answer in the physiological truth, not the objective truth. Our physiological truth comes from within. It's rooted to our perceptions and our memories. Those things that are particular to our experience, which can't be objective even if we want to believe otherwise. There's A, B, and C. So for A, to whom is Padre Blazon referring? What is the content of his discussion he is having with Dunstan? So to answer A, Potter is referring to Mrs. Dempster. The context of his discussion is to help Dunstan understand that there are two truths and that they can often blend together. However, only Dunstan himself can decide what to believe. By accepting his physiological truth, Potter tells Dunstan that that if the town thinks Mary is crazy, it should not matter, and that the only thing that should matter to Dunstan is what he himself thinks of her. And then question B is, what does it mean when we think about Dunstan's memoirs? Personally, to me, it means that Dunstan's account of his life could be biased and unreliable, as he most probably wrote the physiological truth and not the absolute truth, meaning that we only know what Dunstan knows and not what truly happened. And question C is, reflect on what it means more generally for any memorist, for any of us, when we consider what we remember or what we believe to be true. So to answer question C, what we consider to be true is what is true to us. It's what makes sense to most of us. It's what makes sense the most to us and not to others. An example would be two people looking at the number 6 from different angles. One person will see the number 6 as the number 6, however, the other person may see number 6 as the number 9. Now, both of them are telling the truth, and but it's only their psychological truth, because the absolute truth is that the number is actually 6, but from what the person sees, he thinks it's 9. This means that there is no way for any of us to recall the absolute truth, and that we can never be certain if what we remember is the truth and not just a myth or an illusion that our mind has conjured up.